Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be covering three important topics. The first is with reference to Arshad Nadeem's big win at the Commonwealth Games 2022, in which Pakistan has, for the first time, able to score a gold. And this is Pakistan's first athletics medal at the Games since 1966 and the first javelin gold. All the credit goes to, of course, Arshad Nadeem, who we're all very, very proud of. And he did so with his throwing elbow also heavily taped due to injury, and this is something that he had been nursing since the Tokyo Olympics, where he finished fifth last year. And of course, this is something incredible, not just in terms of Pakistan's huge victory at the Commonwealth Games, but of course the determination and the strength of Arshad Nadeem as well, and the way he plays. So we're going to be paying tribute to his victory and taking a look at the extreme value that our athletes deserve, and the kind of respect and the kind of facilities that need to be given to our athletes and the space that we need to provide them to succeed even further. So that's going to be our look at the first segment. Our second segment is going to take a look at what is going on in terms of the One China policy since, of course, Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, which triggered countermeasures from China in the areas surrounding Taiwan, in which military exercises and drills were carried out by China, who has also talked about this particular measure as a legitimate one, as a necessary step to uphold its sovereignty and a legitimate move to safeguard the basic norms of international relations. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China talked about these things, and we also heard various other countries speaking up in favor of the One China policy, and of course also Pakistan, who talked about how this is something extremely clear, that there's only one government of the People's Republic of China that rules all of China, including Taiwan, which is an inalienable part of China, and we strictly oppose any attempt of two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan, or Taiwan independence. This was also said by Moinul Haq, the Pakistani ambassador to China, in an interview with Global Times as well, in which he reiterated Pakistan's stance regarding one China. So we're going to be talking about this and, of course, the kind of countermeasures that have come in from China as well, and their stance of proactively interacting with what they called was U.S. hegemonic designs, U.S. bullying, and saying a clear no to that. So that's going to be our focus of the second segment today. Our third segment is going to take a look at, unfortunately, what has been going on throughout the weekend in Palestine. We've seen that there has been a lot of clashes, three-day clashes that covered the entire weekend as well, that started on Friday when Israel launched preemptive strikes, and then we of course saw in retaliation rockets being fired towards Israel as well. We now know that the militants, the Palestinian freedom fighters, and of course the Israeli forces have declared Gaza truce yesterday, and this is something which has raised some sort of hope in terms of whether or not we're going to be seeing an end to these clashes, which have been the worst since almost a year now in the area, and this is something that both the sides have also recognized and called upon Egypt as being the mediator and contributing to this, something that has also been welcomed by the US President Joe Biden. And what remains to be seen, of course, in the aftermath of this, what is going to happen, how the world is still going to look at the particular issue, and whether or not we're still going to be looking at more lives being lost, since 44 Palestinians, almost half of them civilians, including children, did lose their lives in these clashes as well. So for now, there is a truce, but we're going to be taking a look at this more closely and try to understand the issue here and what is going to evolve in the coming day. For this and more, of course, we've been joined in the studios by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, as always, and we'll be joined online by our guests in our next segments as well. But we'll start off with Arshad Nadeem and his big victory. Faisal, you must have seen the match, and you, of course, must have seen his throw, which had made a record 90.18 meters, and which was huge considering, of course, his previous throws as well, and the fact that there were some really big names in the competition as well. And despite his injury, we saw that Arshad Nadeem really made his mark and gave a big moment to Pakistan.
Sarah, first of all, first man of South Asia that crosses 90 meter barrier. 90.18 is his new personal record and the games record as well. So it is amazing to see, and the very important thing is that I have been watching Nadeem since last time around when he was throwing it against the Indian So I was interested in knowing him more, and this time around we know he has been working really hard, and the government helped him out to take him to South Africa for training as well. He went through a training session as well, so that really helped him. But the very important thing is, during this performance, he was injured, as you have earlier mentioned, that he was taped around on the same arm he was using to throw javelin. And it was amazing. With the injury, he creates a new record and he beats his own previous records. And this is, remarkable. And on his return, all I want is, normally what we see is the sponsors, they always pay attention to the cricketers and none others. This is the time that we need to focus all of these players as well, who come from the ground roots, and they go right up and they work really hard, and the sponsors, they need to look into this as well.
Absolutely. And Farrukh, we've seen, of course, that there are certain sports that have a lot of credit, have a lot of importance in our country as well, and they seem to be taking most of the limelight as well. And it only comes down to certain victories or certain medals where we are actually able to appreciate the other players and so much of their struggle and what they've been going through. How can we make this into a stream that we can see even regularly as well, so that we have even more people like Arshad Nadeem coming in the front?
Right, Sana, let me address the first part of what you just said first, and that is about winning. Who doesn't like to win, right? I think that that is a very important aspect that you have to remember, especially a country that, because of war and terror, had lost direction for quite some time.
True.
And did not emphasize on these things for a long time, 2 decades, right? That's a lifetime for many people. But regarding javelin throwing, let me tell you that, with the exception of my own primary school, junior school, when I partook in this sport as a young athlete, I don't think I had ever followed javelin throwing, right? But yet, last night when it was happening, I was glued to the television. So that actually tells you something about Pakistani mind, how much we want to win. But the truth is that we don't play. It is basically those athletes or those sportsmen who play, and they go through all these motions, they go through all these efforts, and they have their distinct stories. Unfortunately, because the social safety network in this country has been really diminished for quite some time, we have seen that people, especially who come from, to quote Raja Faisal, from grassroots, their suffering is never highlighted. There doesn't seem to be a sports infrastructure to take care of them, and that's why once they actually brave all odds, then we start taking notice and then we listen to them. It is important that they should be highlighting their stories and their suffering right now, because they might be able to help other colleagues of theirs to do it, to actually make it better.
Absolutely.
But there's one headline that I really loved, because somebody actually took the flight of fancy while actually coining this term, and this was in Urdu, Arshad Nadeem ka neza sone par ja laga, right? So nice. Just to translate it, javelin, his javelin struck gold. And I thought that this was really masterful.
It really did. Absolutely. And we're so proud of Arshad Nadeem, and of course so many of our other athletes and players, and we hope that we can give them more value and not just remember them when they win. So congratulations once again to Arshad Nadeem, and maybe we better to our athletes. We'll now move on to our second segment, which is of course the aftermath of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and then the kind of response that China and other countries have given for this. We've been joined by Humayun Khan, who's the senior analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Humayun, for being with us. When we talk about this particular issue, we have seen that in the aftermath of this particular visit, China itself launched a counter measure, and then we saw so many other countries, including Pakistan, stand in support of one China, and made it very clear to the world, and particularly to the US, what China's stance is and what the rest of the international community's stance is as well. Do you think that the kind of responses that have come in, not just from China, but the rest of the world as well, have been some sort of a blow to the US, or some sort of a learning experience for the US to look at this perhaps a little differently, or to be more cautious of such visits in the future?
Unfortunately, the only hyperpower that you were talking about, they've never learned from their mistakes. They've never learned from Iraq. They've never learned from Vietnam. They've never learned from Afghanistan. So this is again another blunder that they are on the path to commit. So this particular visit has created more fissure than it was supposed to do anything else. 23 million people of Taiwan, they're going to suffer more, unfortunately, and I hope they won't. I believe that the Chinese side will show some sort of restraint. They will show the wisdom that they have been dealing with within the realm of the foreign policy. But from the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's visit, the US is basically on the trajectory of creating another conflict in East Asia, as already that they have created in many other conflicts in the world as well.
Yeah, Humayun, do you think that obviously this statement is a very heavy statement, and of course China has started sort of talking about it as well. Of course, it is from the Pakistani side. I just wanted to know, can we say that Pakistan is sensing sort of trouble in coming future in Far East, and of course towards the Taiwan side? That is why Pakistan has made it clear that it has a stance which is a pro-China stance, and Pakistan will stick to it in future?
No, I think there's no doubt about that. I don't know if you follow the trajectory of this relationship, this one China policy, particularly vis-a-vis Taiwan and China, Pakistan is probably one of the most instrumental factor. We were the one who basically led the United States of America to develop its relationship with the Chinese side, People's Republic of China, in 1971 rather, and then it led to the development of this relationship. And from there came the recognition of People's Republic of China for its rightful position in the United Nations Security Council. And from there, US abandoned Republic of China, which is called Taiwan these days, and they accepted that there's only one China policy. So Pakistan is probably one of the most instrumental countries in terms of one China policy. And on August 2nd, our Foreign Office spokesman gave a very official statement. As Sana was also telling in the introduction, our ambassador to China also gave in an unequivocal way that we believe that there's only one China and there's no other China. So our policy has been very consistent since 1972 onwards, 1971 onwards. Your question that we believe that there's going to be some trouble in the region, I think it's not only us. There are many other countries who believe that with this visit of Nancy Pelosi and with a string of other events which were happening in the past in terms of selling arms, in terms of not believing in the territorial integrity of China, we are sensing that trouble is coming in East Asia again. And we are hoping that after Russia and Ukraine crisis, which is still in the middle of anything, is not settled, far from settled, doing something of the sort which Nancy Pelosi did will bring more trouble in the region. And I think China, with its retaliatory measures, first it gave a warning sign that please don't cross red lines. But even though I don't think that the US and other allies of US will stop short of that, they will do something more stupid as they have done. Unfortunately, I shouldn't be using this unparliamentary word, but this is the trajectory of the event that we have been seeing in the past. And we sense that trouble is coming in the East Asian region again.
Right. Humayun, first of all, let me compliment you for your memory, because when you called America hyperpower, it reminded me of Jacques Chirac, the former French president, who used to call America hyperpuissant, or particularly about the very same thing. But at this moment, since we are talking about the situation on ground, let me ask you, what is the worst that can happen? Do you think that there's going to be only this muscular posturing, or there's going to be anything more than this?
No, unfortunately, as of now, anything is a possibility. The American side has crossed the red lines, which China has clearly enunciated for last like 10, 15 years that, we want peaceful reunification of the breakaway province, which everybody believes, by the way, according to the UN resolution, 99 or 95 or 98%, depending upon the percentage, I probably would be like sort of like giving you plus 1 or 2%. Majority of the countries of the UN recognized world believe that China is one China, and Taiwan is part of that. President Xi Jinping, since he has assumed the power in 2013, has been making a lot of overtures in terms of expanding trade relationship, in terms of expanding people-to-people relationship. But this act basically is something which China would not take as a light measure. So they will take all possible measures so that in future nothing of the sort would happen. And it's not like a doomsday scenario, but there could be a possibility of an escalation. We have already seen live drills, which we have not seen in the last 20, 25, 30 years. We have seen that.
Right, Mr. Humayun, when we talk about this particular measure, of course, from China as well, and the possibility of escalation, as you were pointing out, I want to understand the kind of impact that is going to have in the longer term on the Sino-American relations, and particularly any sort of a response or a statement or a clarification or some sort of a measure taken in by the US as well to clear the waters, or to be able to make sure that its stance is clear in the international community as well?
I think it's a little too late for clearing any stance from the US side, because
sure, but moving on, of course, what sort of response do you expect from the US? Yes.
I think you're right in terms of asking this question, but my answer was slightly in a different way. When this visit was about to happen, all State Department, CIA, Pentagon, everybody said this is something which should not have happened. This is not the right time. And despite that, Donald Trump didn't call, President Biden didn't personally call Nancy Pelosi and tell her not to take this visit. And then they gave a lot of democracy and other, that how US democracy works. Having said that, I think there's going to be repercussions in future, because we are seeing that inflation throughout the world has increased because of a number of factors. Russia and Ukraine are still like reeling from not getting out of that conflict. And if we have this new issue, which is China and Taiwan, and I keep saying China, which is basically Taiwan and China, and this somehow makes a lot of sense as well. I think the world is going to see a lot of repercussion from this visit. There's going to be delays in embargoes. There's going to be embargoes from the Chinese side on the Taiwanese firm. There's going to be a lot of issues in East China Sea, South China Sea, and we will see repercussions of this visit for months and years to come now.
Yeah, Humayun, talking about escalation, you have rightly pointed out, and I just wanted to, get some kind of more information from you. How do you see things moving on, especially in relation with the Quad? Where do you see its role in coming future? As at the moment, we know that it is a non-military alliance. But of course, Japanese involvement and then Indian involvement and Australian and American involvement in it. Can we suspect that in coming future, Quad might turn itself from non-military alliance to a military alliance? We know that in recent times they have conducted joint naval exercises as well. Can we say that in coming future they might turn themselves into a military alliance? If so, then how cautious should Pakistan remain, because we should not be forgetting that we are neighboring India?
No, absolutely, Faisal. This is a very, very pertinent question with regards to this recent visit. It's not only Quad which has the potential of becoming a troublemaker for Sino-US relationship in the future. It is AUKUS, it is I2U2. They're like other mechanism. There's like G7 commitment in terms of spending money to counter Belt and Road Initiative. So this is basically a culmination of US versus China, which was working on a peaceful development of the world through Belt and Road Initiative. And USA was coming up with different mechanism in order to either halt BRI or either to stop BRI or to completely contain China in many facts. So this is going to be a big issue in the near future, in my opinion.
And Humayun, if it does take place, can we see the Galwan and Eastern Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh of India once again getting heat from Chinese side?
I think China has been very clear in terms of its policy. Like they believe that the world should run on international principle, international organization, United Nations Security Council, UN General Assembly movements. So if other countries do not respect the red lines which China has drawn on the basis of international organization, international conventions, then China has the right to resort to any form of countermeasures. So if India does that, I think China is going.
Right, and Mr. Humayun, since there seems to be some sort of technical problem and our cameras are only showing Raja Faisal's face, I think he has come under this illusion that he's the only one here. But me and Farrukh Pitafi are still here and we have many questions for you. When we talk about Pakistan's stance, of course, and there's so many other governments who've come out and given their own stance on the One China principle as well. I want to understand what the general public's opinion as well, both within the US and outside of US as well. What is the international public opinion on the One China principle and whether or not there are people within these governments, within these countries, within the US as well, who are claiming or talking otherwise?
I think the world opinion is pretty clear depending upon who you're talking to. If we were saying if the UN recognized country like 192 or 93 or 94, I may be missing one or two, a majority of them believe that there's only one China. And all the periphery and the territory of China involves, including Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, they're all part of China. There is like one country and two systems when it comes to Hong Kong and China, but everybody believes in that. But if somebody does not believe in the UN recognized principle, then there's a trouble. And then that trouble needs to be dealt in a different way. China probably is going to deal with it first from using international mechanisms which are available, and if not, President Xi Jinping has made it very clear that if somebody declares independence from the recognized territory of China, we have the right to resort to any form of physical actions, violence, or whatever you call it. And I think that's basically a right of the country who has been recognized by the entire international community.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Humayun Khan, for joining us and talking to us regarding this particular issue and being with us as part of the segment. Our next segment is going to be focusing on what is going on in Palestine and Israel right now. And we've seen a large number of clashes, a large number of deaths over the weekend as well. And thankfully, we have heard news of a truce that had started just yesterday. And so we're going to try and understand what is the situation on ground. We've, of course, seen the loss of many lives, but we want to understand what really is happening at the moment and whether or not this truce will stand. Farrukh, when we talk about this particular issue, we've seen such clashes emerge in the past as well, and these clashes erupted on Friday. And of course, since this escalation, now we have seen this truce come into place. Do you think that this particular truce will hold in the sense that can any sort of a truce or any sort of a stop in these attacks give a guarantee to some sort of workable peace in the future?
Right, Sana, I think this has been a vicious cycle in Israeli politics. I think since Netanyahu's government actually opted for first election, since then it has been happening that every time Israel goes to an election, they start some kind of vicious cycle of attacks in Gaza and at times West Bank as well. And we have seen how Netanyahu and Israeli state have been actually using this to shore up support for their own faction. And unfortunately, because Netanyahu actually ruled Israel for a very long time, we know for a fact that there were times when Gaza was being raided people actually brought their sofa to the mountains to sit and eat popcorn and watch the warfare.
Wow.
This kind of brutal conditioning actually continues, and that's why, unfortunately, the operation or the war in Gaza repeatedly becomes a kind of theater that helps them in elections. Unfortunately, this time there's a moderate government, and even then this is happening, and perhaps because they also want to show to their constituents that they are more muscular. But unfortunately, all the so-called liberals forget that more muscular they try to pretend, they are going to play to the gallery, which is eventually going to strengthen the hard right. This time also Netanyahu is expected to, or his party is expected to win. So this vicious cycle will continue. And because Netanyahu faces corruption charges as well, if he comes back to power, he is going to further keep on upping the ante.
Right.
So I don't see any hope.
All right. Let me also welcome in the debate Palestinian journalist Mr. Sami Hamdi. Thank you so much, Mr. Sami, for joining us and being a part of the debate. First of all, I'd like to talk a bit more about the truce. We have seen, of course, reports coming in of major clashes throughout the weekend, and now we're hearing reports of a truce. What really is the current on-ground situation, and what do you think is happening in terms of this particular truce in the next coming days? Is it going to stay?
And is it fair to call it clashes, sir? Because one side is totally disempowered, the other side has all the latest technology.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I'm an Arab. I'm not exactly a Palestinian, but I am certainly an Arab. The second point is that
All right.
with regards to what's unfolding, I think there are three very important dynamics that govern this particular latest clash. The first, of course, has already been mentioned, which is the elections. Yair Lapid is facing elections. The polls don't look favorable for those who are currently in government. And Yair Lapid knows and understands that in previous elections, the more Palestinians you kill, the more votes you get in Israel. The more you show commitment to the apartheid regime, the more you win votes. And this is why what we've seen is a more carefully orchestrated attack on Gaza. We saw a sort of a semi-agreement made between the Israelis and Hamas, in that the target would be the Islamic jihadist movement, not the wider Palestinian resistance movement. We saw Yair Lapid allow the police to accompany far-right into Al-Aqsa Mosque to go and harass the protesters there. The idea being that Yair Lapid is trying to send a message that even though I'm a centrist, even though I'm a liberal, I'm also committed to apartheid, I'm also committed to bombarding Gaza. The second dynamic, of course, that's worth noting is that Tel Aviv is being approached by some of the most powerful Muslim countries and being told quite bluntly that whatever Israel does to Palestine will not affect bilateral ties. It will not affect relations between these Muslim powers and between Tel Aviv. So there is this encouragement in that Tel Aviv believes that bombing Gaza will bear no international consequences regarding Israel's ties with some of these Muslim powers. And the third dynamic, of course, is Joe Biden, who on his visit to Tel Aviv said quite bluntly that he has no interest in reviving a peace process at this moment in time, and that instead he is a firm Zionist. Blinken, of course, the Secretary of State, reasserted what he called his ironclad support for Israel in the immediate aftermath of Israel killing an American Christian citizen in Shireen Abu Aqla. So these dynamics coming together, including the elections, have resulted in a tentative approach by Yair Lapid to attack Gaza to the extent in which he might gain votes, but not enough to spark a full-out conflict in the manner when we saw Hamas and the other resistance humiliate Israel last year by landing rockets in Tel Aviv. This appears to have been an orchestrated campaign to try to win votes without sparking a war that might humiliate Yair Lapid. At this moment in time, there is a truce. The Islamic Jihad movement, they call the Jihad al-Islami, that's what they called. They have pushed for the release of 2 prisoners. They have signed this truce on the basis that Egypt will guarantee the release of these prisoners, and that Egypt will talk to Israel and guarantee that Israel will release these prisoners. It's not clear yet if these prisoners will be released, but what is clear is that there is tension in Israel over the upcoming elections. There is concern that no party will be able to dominate. There is concern Netanyahu might make a comeback, and this is what leads many to believe that this ceasefire may not last, because if Yair Lapid believes that he will not win the next elections, then it may well be in the week or 2 weeks before the elections we see another all-out war, another attempt to scare the Israelis into voting for the parties, and a bid by Yair Lapid to show that I am committed to this apartheid and I am committed to the killing of Palestinians.
Of course, it is a
Netanyahu
political
and
decision from them, and of course they are implementing on it. Sami, I wanted to get enlightened from your side when I say that, of course, every time when a bombing takes place from Israeli side on obviously Palestinian side, what we always see that the hospitals, schools, even they are not spared, and the religious sites are not spared. Just wanted to know, even this time around, out of 44 deaths, of course 15 of them, they were kids. They were merely kids who obviously got brutally murdered or killed by the bombings of the Israeli side. I keep on hearing this word on international media which says Israeli preemptive strikes. Can you please make me understand why the international media keeps on using preemptive strike when they know that it is not preemptive strike? It should be used as barbarism. It should be used as a war crime. That whatever Israelis are doing on Palestine, it is a blatant war crimes. It should be considered as that. Can we highlight this? That the foreign media, international media, they need to change this stance, number one, and number two, should the International Court of Justice take notice of it, and should they brand it as war crimes?
And also, what is the general norm on preemptive strikes? What sort of international obligations or norms exist regarding this? What is even the criteria, and what factors actually even allow such a thing as preemptive strikes?
I think as far as the letter of the law is concerned, Israel in and of itself is an illegal occupier of land that does not belong to it. I think in terms of the letter of the law, and this has already been established, Israel is occupying the territories, which is why it's called in the UN as the occupied territories of Palestine. I think that in terms of the letter of the law, I think it's abundantly clear that Israel is in violation of almost every single law of war, whether that's with regards to preemptive strike, whether that's with regards to its killing of civilians, bombing of hospitals, killing of the elderly, and it's huge damage that it causes with every attack. What is important to note, however, is to remember that when Trump was in power in the US, we saw a very frank exchange between the US and between the International Criminal Court, where the International Criminal Court thought about investigating American soldiers in Afghanistan. John Bolton, who was then the National Security Advisor, came out and said that any investigation would result in sanctions on the International Criminal Court and on the judges of the International Criminal Court. So it's abundantly clear that irrespective of the systems that are in place, the US in particular ensures that Israel is able to act with impunity. The reason being is numerous. One may be European guilt. Remember that the Europeans are the ones who embarked on the Holocaust. The Europeans are the ones who embarked on the Inquisition. They are the ones who massacred, slaughtered, and gassed the Jews, and it was the Muslims who took the Jews in and lived with them side by side and gave them a haven before, of course, the Zionists turned around and then turfed the Muslims out of their territory. The idea being that, one, there is this guilt. The second point to note is that it's important to highlight that the likes of Blinken, the likes of Jake Sullivan, and the likes of these other advisors, they all themselves, many of them have Israeli passports. Many of them believe in the Israeli vision. Many of them now are in positions of power and influence to dictate the narrative that is being pushed by Western media. And the reason why I say this is that while it's true that Western media is wrong not to call out Israel, it's wrong that it doesn't refer to war crimes, it's wrong that it doesn't refer to the crimes of Israel, it's equally, if not a greater tragedy, that what encourages this narrative is that Muslim powers today, I won't name them, but many of them, if you look at their own media today in the coverage of Gaza, they are using similar language. They are blaming the Palestinians for Israel's bombardment of Gaza.
And
they
that's a fair point, Sami
source.
Hamdi. That is a fair point. Sana, I just very quickly wanted to make an intervention regarding what Raja Faisal was earlier saying death of children in Gaza, right? And it is important because there is a documentary movie made in 2016. It is called The Occupation of American Mind. And of course, the movie was made by American professors. In that documentary, they have shown that after the first Israel-Arab war, when there was blowback, Israel actually created a ministry of propaganda. And the first thing they came up with was a spin regarding Palestinians, that we can forgive Palestinians for killing us, but they make us kill their children. They make us kill their children, right? So this is such and repeatedly, whenever you listen to our Western commentary on Western channels, this is what you keep on hearing, that they are sending their kids to die in the line of fire. So unfortunately, at this moment, what might be getting to our hearts and must be breaking it, that has become a propaganda tool in their hands as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mr. Sami, when we talk about all of these measures and of course the unfortunate state of affairs and what you were earlier pointing out as well, stances coming in from different Muslim countries as well, moving forward, what sort of a development are you able to see in terms of any country playing its role? I'm sure that, and as you mentioned regarding Egypt and its stance and its role as a mediator or as a facilitator in this particular truce as well, and whether or not we will be able to see the prisoners going free as well. Do you think that any country can go beyond that, even Egypt or other countries, since of course the kind of statements that have been coming in from Joe Biden, the US or others, of course we can claim or make statements regarding Israel as an occupying force, but what really is happening is that big powers are going in and visiting and legitimizing them in a certain way, right? So how do we see moving forward the role of particular Muslim countries or countries such as Egypt moving beyond just a mediator in a truce?
I think that's a very valid question. I think the easiest way for Pakistani viewers to understand this particular problem is to look at the issue of Kashmir and the struggles that Pakistan has had in trying to convince the Muslim world to come to a united front and actually apply pressure in order to secure any developments regarding Kashmir. And I think Pakistani frustrations on this front reflect the frustrations of Palestinians regarding trying to get the Muslim world to actually do something regarding their cause. And I actually think that, and it's tragic that I paint this picture, if you look at it now, you actually see that many in the Muslim world now are on Israel's side against the Palestinians. They are lobbying on behalf of Israel against the Palestinians. So in terms of going forward, the reality is that the Palestinians are now increasingly isolated internationally. The countries that are playing the roles of mediators are also the countries that are blockading Gaza on the other side, the countries that are speaking on behalf of or negotiating these ceasefires are in and of themselves pressuring the Palestinian resistance not to go after Israel, not to counter Israel's aggression. The reality is that when we look at the state of Palestine at the moment, the reality is that they have Allah and it appears no one else. And I think this is in and of itself, it may be a watershed moment in the Palestinian cause, in that what we're now seeing is a new generation of Palestinians who have accepted this reality that they don't have international support and are therefore seeking to create their own influence and power to really push back against Israel. And this is why I think that
Sami, can we revisit your analogy, this Kashmir analogy? Because last time I checked, there was no ethnic Kashmiri country part of OIC. Kashmir is a state that is under occupation, but there is no sovereign country that is Kashmiri. But compared to that, there are umpteen, Arab countries. You earlier said that you are not Palestinian, but you are Arab, right? So why is it that Arab countries fail to do this as well? For Palestine, I understand that Kashmir is a cause that Pakistan has been standing up with, and the OIC occasionally also comes to morally support it. But regarding the Arab countries, there is so much wealth and power there. Why couldn't they actually stand up for Palestinians?
I think the short answer is short-termism and short-term pragmatism. The second answer, of course, is that the US laid down the law with regards to Israel. King Faisal was assassinated soon after his oil embargo, in which he plunged the world into an economic crisis in protest at US support for Israel. King Faisal was assassinated. Egypt went to war against Israel and found essentially itself defeated in the Six-Day War and in the subsequent war, even though it took back Sinai. And as a result of the competition between the different Arab leaders, the prospect of taking Palestine became essentially impossible to achieve. The reality is that with each individual nation now looking inwards, with the rise of this rabid nationalism, with the idea of looking only inwards towards our own borders, with the move away from this Muslim unity that has perhaps governed our conscience at least over the past century, I do think the reality is that when it comes to the Arabs, there is this dark tragedy unfolding in that Palestine for them, the Arab leaders, not the people. The Arab leaders no longer see it as a priority. And this is why in recent times we saw Erdogan take up the cause and Muslims rallying behind that. We saw Pakistan for a while under Imran Khan, really Muslims rallying behind that. Pakistan, I think now is embroiled in its own domestic situation. But the reality is that when it comes to the Palestine issue, I don't think it's that the Arabs have given up on it, but rather the leaders have been disciplined somewhat by a US global order.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sami Hamdi, for joining us and being a part of the debate and sharing your views with us. Of course, our hearts goes out to the people of Palestine. They always have. And we really hope that we're able to see some change there, and that this truce, this particular truce that has started yesterday also stays, and then we're able to also see a much larger and a longer term change and peace in the region for the people of Palestine. That's all we have from the debate. See you tomorrow.